Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm Lorene Elgert. I'm a part of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Initiative at WPI. And I'm going to lead us into the next section of our program, which is a roundtable with some of our faculty. This roundtable welcomes 5 project center directors to reflect on the origins and experiences of WPI's commitment in Latin America, successes and challenges of sustainability and community engagement, and what this has meant for faculty and students. But first, I'd like to introduce William San Martin. As a science and technology studies scholar, William was awarded a Global Lab Fellowship in 2019-20, where he undertook research on the impacts of the IQP program on transnational knowledge and technology transfer. So William will offer a few words to open our roundtable, and then we'll proceed with talking with each of our individual project center directors. William?
Thank you, Lorene, for the introduction. I would like to use these few minutes to highlight a couple of lessons that I consider critical when we think about the role of our project centers in issues of justice and sustainability across the Americas. Before I jump into my talk, I would like to say that these insights, as you said, Lorene, were part of a preliminary research project that I conducted while a fellow at the Global Lab. This project would not have been possible without the support from Arthur Carlson and Amy Smith from WPI's archive and the work of 2 of our students, Patrick O'Mullan and Cecilia Schroeder. They assisted with archival research and were a critical part of drafting some of the arguments I will share with you all today. Can we jump to the next slide, please? And I would like to start with a quote. Courses in social sciences have been often required in science and engineering curricula. While valuable in themselves, there was no experimental component which brought into physical reality for the students the social, political, and humanistic dimension of their technological world. Each graduate at WPI is now expected to qualify in a field project, which is designated to develop a greater awareness of the relationships between science and engineering on one hand, and social concern and human values in the other. This component of the WPI program has proven to be one of the most fascinating, end quote. These are some of the words expressed in the final report of the National Science Foundation Advisory Panel released in 1975, evaluating the first years of the WPI plan. And let me give you some context here. During the early 1970s, public criticism of technology and its negative social and ecological impacts increased in the US. Engineers, along with a broader group of STEM professionals, were to blame for their lack of understanding and vision of how technological systems take place in complex socio-political and cultural contexts, especially when working in foreign lands with unfamiliar environments, communities, and languages. STEM-oriented institutions reacted by launching reforms to their engineering curricula. Significant changes took place in institutions like MIT, Caltech, and other STEM-oriented organizations. These changes led to the creation of humanities and social sciences departments, the expansion of faculty hires, and specific programs fostering a kind of expertise that was imagined at the intersection of STEM and the social sciences and the humanities. As many higher education leaders phrase it in internal documents and professional meetings, engineering expertise and education were in crisis. The humanities and social sciences were required to save engineering from its imminent collapse. Next, please. As we see in this publication in the New York Times in 1973, featuring the WPI plan, many internal leaders and external observers frame these changes as a way to build a new engineer, a more humanistic one. Next slide, please. The acknowledgement that human problems and human values, either we want it or not, are at the center of the work of STEM professionals became a guiding principle in how many saw the changes implemented by the WPI plan. Next one, please. Both The expressions humanist technologies and technological humanists were broadly used in internal documents and the media to describe this new graduate. Now, many of these changes occur in STEM institutions across the United States, and WPI was no exception. However, as described in my initial quote, what was radically different was the experimental component and physical reality that interactive qualifying projects and off-campus centers brought to students and faculty. And here I would like to suggest the WPI network of project centers were a fundamental departure from other curricular changes in STEM institutions in the US at the time. Now, we know that off-campus centers remain very local during the first years. That meant the social, political, and humanistic dimensions of a student's learning processes also remain local and very narrow in scope. Next slide, please. From the mid-1970s to the late 1980s, the internationalization of off-campus centers remained constrained within North America and Western Europe. It is only until the early 1990s, with the establishment of the first centers in Latin America and Asia, that these projects started involving what we call today the Global South or the developing world, and therefore issues of human values and cultures unique to these regions. This provided a completely new vision and experience of how human values, culture, and politics means for technological systems outside industrialized nations. Next one, please. So what lessons can we take from this history? Thank you. To answer these questions, I would like to use two examples: the opening of the project center in Puerto Rico and Ecuador in the early 1990s. During this time frame, Latin America was experiencing profound democratization process, opening up issues of political violence, but also opening up new markets. Simultaneously, the profound negative impacts of development and political programs supported by the United States in the region since the 1960s were becoming increasingly evident at both sides of the border. Issues of economic development, inequalities, violence, and the environment in this region were understood as problems of profound transnational nature that could not be answered with a narrow national perspective. At the same time, as many leaders on campus recognized, Hispanic and Latino populations were increasing across the US and in central Massachusetts. In combination, many of these processes provided a sense of urgency for new transnational, inter-American, transcultural approaches to engineering education. Next one, please. In this context, the establishment of the Puerto Rico Center and the agreement with Universidad de Puerto Rico Mayagüez was considered a strategic movement to link the mainland United States with Latin America. Puerto Rico was envisioned as a critical program to bridge issues of multiculturalism, multilingualism, colonialism, and economic development, not only across, but in this case, within political and cultural borders. The Puerto Rico Center acknowledged that the Students Project will not only assist the Puerto Rican community in the island, but also address the profound demographic changes in the US and issues of diversity on campus. As some of the WPI leaders at the time acknowledged, the establishment of the Puerto Rico Center meant opening new opportunities to make the WPI campus more attractive to Hispanic students from both the United States and Latin America. Next one, please. Around the same time, the Escuela Superior Politécnica del Litoral, ESPOL, in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and WPI established an agreement focused on interdisciplinary studies of environmental sciences and management. This center was unique at the time because besides providing opportunities for undergraduate students projects, it also established a formal program for faculty and graduate students exchange between both institutions. Participants consider coordinating research a critical and innovative way to take advantage of both institutions' expertise. Next one, please. And I would like to finish with this, a couple of final reflections on the lessons that I take. Although in the process of globalization of the WPI curriculum after this period to the present, issues of diversity, social justice, and sustainability are extensive. The establishment of these first centers in Latin America consolidated a distinct path. First, they embrace a profoundly transnational, transregional, and transcultural perspective. In this sense, the study of social inequalities and environmental management were not considered a Puerto Rican or Ecuadorian problem, but problems whose origins and ramifications were shaped by social, economic, and cultural processes across borders, including the United States. Second, the social and human dimensions of technology embedded in the origins of the WPI plan took a new form shaped by issues of economic dependency, colonialism, and multilingualism. Many of them are today at the center of conversations about global environmental justice and sustainable development. Finally, participant organizations saw these partnerships as strategic for development of local communities and higher institutions in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also to address critical issues of diversity, social justice, and inclusion in the mainland US and in the WPI campus. Through these partnerships, PQP syllabi on campus started integrating new readings about development and environment. Ecuadorian scholars completed graduate studies in WPI. New faculty hires in Spanish and Spanish training increased its importance for the expansion of these programs. Students and faculty started embracing concerns about the developing world, poverty and colonialism, global inequalities and sustainability in ways that just few other project centers could offer. Today, we're having this event to celebrate the launching of the Global School. We're also celebrating the establishment of a new minor in Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and our grant from the U.S. Education Department that would help us expand and integrate efforts in the region. In many ways, all of these achievements seem a natural consequence of the radical curricular changes established 50 years ago and the efforts to globalize and maybe Latino-Americanize our curriculum initiated in the 1990s. The question that I would like to ask everyone today is, how do we want to proceed for the next 50 years? How do we keep expanding and continue strengthening these projects? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, William. That was fascinating context and insight into WPI's project centers in Latin America and the Caribbean. So now we will direct some questions to our faculty roundtable. I'll introduce them as we go, and we'll start with Professor Aaron Sekulich, who is the Project Center Director of the Panama Project Center. Aaron, why did you get involved with the Panama Project Center? And what keeps you interested and engaged there?
So I got involved with the Panama Project Center the way that I get involved with everything in my life, which is to say completely accidentally. I fell backwards into it. To understand why, a little bit about my background is that I went to a very conventional engineering university, the type that William was just speaking about. And during my education, we were always told that there are two things in the world. There's engineering and there's things that are not worth doing, because only engineering can improve the world and only engineering can lead to progress. And at the time, I believed that. And I had never left the country before. I had barely even left the state of Pennsylvania. And then during my third year of graduate school, due to what I presume was a clerical error, I was awarded a Fulbright grant to study in Morocco for a year. So it was my first time out of the country, and it was an unspeakably meaningful experience. The Aaron that came back and the Aaron that went there would not recognize each other if they bumped into each other on the street. So then when I started at WPI, the project system was part of the appeal for coming to WPI. After going to Morocco, I realized the world is a huge, interesting place. I traveled all over. I went to Tunisia, Egypt, India, Thailand, Iceland, Syria, a bunch of places. But I thought about the Global Projects Program kind of the same. It was, tourism. I'd apply maybe to the Australia Project Center and big drinks and tiny umbrellas on the beach, that kind of thing. And so then before I got tenure, I was doing what everybody pre-tenure does, which is cranking out grant proposals one after another. And I was writing one for the NSF's International REU program. And because I had lived in Morocco, I was trying to write it about Morocco, and it wasn't coming together. It was not a good proposal. So I'd work on that at work. And then when I went home, I had a book that I was reading that I bought at Brimfield called Panama Passage. And I cannot stress enough, this is not a good book. It doesn't know if it's a romance or an adventure, shallow character, awful. But I would struggle with trying to make this grant proposal come together, and then I'd go and read about Panama. And eventually, it took much longer than it should have. It occurred to me, we have a project center in Panama. And so I started learning about it. At the time, it was run by Taharo Korchi, and it was only for NQPs. It had been established in 2010. But it really made a lot of sense for the proposal I was writing, in particular because we get a lot of support from our alumni network down there. There's a lot of Panamanians that have gone to WPI that are very, very generous with their time and expertise in helping us set it up. So I was eventually awarded that grant, again, presumably a clerical error. And because I got the grant, they asked me to become part of the project center. And at that time, the MQP was what I valued. It's engineering. Little by little, I started learning more and more about the IQP, kind of absorbing it from the people I was interacting with in IGSD. And so we eventually decided to expand the Panama site to support IQPs. And in fact, Lorene and I wrote a grant proposal, which again was funded because this one was good. She had a big part in it. No clerical error. And we got funding to send the first IQP team down to Panama, which I will always remember. What a wonderful team that was. And being involved in the Panama Project Center has really made it clear to me the brilliance of the WPI plan that William was talking about earlier. It is something that is direly needed. All those people that told me engineering was the only important thing were incredibly wrong. And it's also, it's not study abroad. It's not service learning. It's the one thing WPI has that nobody else comes even close to replicating. And so me personally, I don't believe that things happen for a reason. Frankly, if they do, somebody's got a lot of explaining to do, especially after this year. I believe that sometimes things just happen and sometimes things happen to you. And I often reflect on how happy I am that this book was called Panama Passage and not New York Passage or Kansas Passage or something like that. Because my involvement in the Project Center, one, it's just something truly unique and so useful for the students. And it's meant a lot to me personally as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much. That was a nice account of both the emotional, personal and professional advantages of being involved with the Project Center, right? Thank you, Erin. Next, let's hear from Arthi Madan. She is the director of the Buenos Aires Project Center. Arthi, where are you?
I'm here.
There you are. Arthi, why did you create a Humanities and Arts Project Center in Buenos Aires?
Thanks, Laureen, for that question. I'm sort of the antithesis of Erin in some ways because I fell in love with Buenos Aires at a very young age, 21. I traveled there all by myself for my first independent research project. The college that I went to had a project-based curriculum as well, except our projects happened in the month of January. And our junior and senior year, we could design them on our own. And sort of in the fortuitous way that research sometimes pans out, I wound up studying Jewish immigration from Buenos Aires to Israel. So that was in 2004. There was an economic crisis in Buenos Aires. It was a great time to be an undergrad on a shoestring budget in a cosmopolitan city. And about a year and a half later, I wound up at the University of Pittsburgh doing my PhD with one of the world's foremost experts on Jewishness in the Latin American imaginary. Again, as research works out, I ended up changing course a bit and still wound up back in Argentina thinking about questions of identity. But I was thinking about identity more in terms of the relationship between land and literature in 19th century Latin America, so what we call environmental humanities. Buenos Aires is just an incredible, incredible place to do research. It's chock full of bookstores and big archives, libraries, museums to visit. And then you can go to these wonderful cafes and sit and write and mull and drink good coffee. And I knew long ago that I wanted to take students to Buenos Aires at one point. So in 2010, when I was fortunate enough to land a job at WPI in the middle of a global recession, I couldn't have been more psyched to have had a department head who really wanted a humanities and arts program somewhere in Latin America. And I knew I wanted to take students to Argentina to do kind of a more traditional study abroad, something where they could really hone their language skills in an authentic cultural context, right? Sometimes with IQP, students are kind of in bubbles where they are doing really fascinating work, but they're not necessarily getting that cultural component as much. So this was the focus. I jumped at the chance. I got the job in August, designed the program that fall, and had students abroad that summer of 2011. So in many ways, this program stands out from other project centers for a couple of main reasons. It's the only program where students live with host families. They eat meals with these host families for their entire stay, which isn't such a radical idea elsewhere, but it really does make a difference in terms of cultural exposure. Also, we're different because the students are attending classes every day for 4 weeks at our partner institution, which is Universidad de San Andres. They have a campus right in the heart of downtown Buenos Aires. And, you know, compared to our students, some of our students' hometowns, Worcester is something of a metropolis, right? But relative to Buenos Aires, which is a very bustly city, Worcester is subdued and sleepy. So the students get there and they have this sort of shock, and then they have this transformation over the course of the term as they really become experts at navigating not only the city and its unique public transportation system, but also the Argentine accent is different from what a lot of them have been exposed to in their previous Spanish classes in the United States. So they start just utterly lost, but then they end up knowing more than me in some ways because they're there on the ground as young people, right? And a lot of them are in between their freshman and sophomore year. So, you know, for me to tell them, I'm not gonna shepherd you to a graffiti tour, or I'm not gonna, you know, take you by the hand to a theater, rather meet me there, figure it out. And they do, they really do figure it out. We get the opportunity also to travel outside of the city. We do excursions to Iguazu Falls. I get to see them in their faces as they are seeing this magical, wondrous place for the first time. I take them to Colonia, which is in Uruguay, so they get another stamp in their passport. It's just kind of an opportunity for them to really experience life in a language, right? That's kind of a very different way of engaging with life. So I gotta say that I really get to spend a lot of time with the students in Argentina, which is different. I've advised in Costa Rica and in Puerto Rico, and I really do love seeing their growth firsthand. It's a subjective and imperfect impression, but nevertheless, it's there. I can see their individual learning gains and their language gains and their confidence, right, from beginning to end. So the program is one unit. 1/3 of it they spend at the University of San Andres with a professor. Her name is Vale Tetti, and she's wonderful. Another third is a class that I or the on-site faculty advisor, which in 2018, John Galante accompanied them. So he'll or I will teach a class to them. And then the third component of the unit is an independent research project that they design on their own with faculty guidance. And the range of projects has really been fascinating. A great deal sit at the intersection of environment and culture, whether they're thinking about literature and art and how they connect with ecological consciousness, or I had a student think about the impact of civil engineering on indigenous communities in Iguazu Falls. There's a lot of autonomy in the program. And ultimately, I love it because it's an opportunity for them to get real independence in this sort of cultural buffet of Buenos Aires. And they come back with a greater sense of themselves as global citizens, as humanists, and really as adults.
Amazing. Thank you. It sounds like your long-term engagement with Buenos Aires turns into the students' long-term engagement with Buenos Aires, right?
Definitely.
Very, very nice. Thank you so much, Arthi. Let's progress. Let's proceed with our next project center director, and that is Lauren Matthews.
I'm here.
Hi, Lauren. Lauren is the project center director for the Puerto Rico Project Center, actually the first project center in Latin America that was established at WPI. So Lauren, how does the Puerto Rico Project Center provide students with a unique Latin American experience?
So great, thanks for the question, Laureen. Puerto Rico is indeed, it's the second oldest of the WPI project centers, I think, and as you mentioned, the oldest of the Latin American centers, certainly. It's now approaching its 30th anniversary. That should be not this upcoming cycle, but next year it should hit its 30th anniversary. So I've only been the director of the center for about 6 to 7 years, and I'm by no means an expert on Puerto Rico, but I have had a lot of opportunity over these years to really watch our students and observe some of the ways in which I can predict that they're going to change as a result of their experiences in Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico, as I think probably everyone in the audience knows, it's unique in Latin America in terms of its relationship with the United States, as it occupies a position that's somewhere between the rest of Latin America and the US in many domains, and that includes cultural, social, and economic aspects. So this complex relationship between both Latin America and the United States affects, I think, pretty much all aspects of life on the island of Puerto Rico. And there's a clear tension between these two influences that makes itself evident in many ways. And I think gives Puerto Ricans a unique sense of identity, and in many ways, I think sometimes manifesting itself as an identity crisis. In some ways, my impression is that Puerto Rico receives sometimes the best of both influences and benefits from this intermediate placement, not being really a fully integrated part of Latin America, but not really being a fully integrated part of the United States either. But in other contexts, the island does suffer as a result of this sort of intermediate placement. And this has both policy and cultural implications on the island. So for Puerto Ricans, the island's relationship with the United States, I think, structures daily life in many ways that are both conscious and unconscious. And I think they think about it a lot. It's a subject of frequent consideration for them and affects so many parts of daily life. But for our students, the relationship between the United States and any of its territories is pretty foreign to them. They may have studied some of the political relationships between the US and territories and the historical relationships, but being on the ground and really understanding the implications for the people of those territories is brand new to them. So this reality on the ground in Puerto Rico means that our project center students, who are almost entirely United States citizens and are usually visiting Latin America for the first time, so they have to confront and wrestle with these questions about their own identity, I think. What does it mean to be an American? And how does that differ from what it means to be a United States citizen? So what are the rights and responsibilities of a US citizen? How does that result in common experiences between Puerto Ricans and other US citizens? And what's the role of culture and cultural differences in defining a national identity? So of particular interest, I think, of course, is the question of statehood. So our students have to think about, they discover quickly that Puerto Ricans are conflicted about this question of statehood. And they are forced to think about, why would Puerto Ricans be conflicted about this question? So in order to understand why people have these internal conflicts, and I don't think they ever get a perfect understanding, but they do think about it. So our students have to understand that from the perspective of the people of Puerto Rico, statehood would involve probably both gains and sacrifices. And I don't think that our students have really ever confronted that idea, or find it really easy to internalize and think about that idea that being a state for Puerto Ricans would have both positives and negatives. So students get a chance to explore these ideas both through their projects, which almost entirely, almost universally involve strong involvement with local communities. That's a theme that we always seek out in our sponsors, but I think that our partner sponsors in Puerto Rico are particularly dedicated to this kind of bottom-up community involvement work. So our students are almost always interacting closely with members of the local community to the extent that their kind of limited Spanish speaking skills allow. But they also confront these questions just on their day-to-day interactions, informal interactions with everyone they meet, everyone they interact with in Puerto Rico. And I think that all of these interactions in the project and outside the project really encourage students to think more carefully, more thoughtfully about their own backgrounds, their own experiences, and their own biases, and how these factors have kind of shaped their life experiences so far. And I don't think that students come back from Puerto Rico incredibly wise and really being able to think about their own identity and other identities. But I think they have the seeds of this process as a result of this experience. And I hope that they continue to grow and develop some more ability to understand the world a little differently. That's that.
Wow, thank you so much. I think in all the project centers, we think of, the travel and the cultural immersion and sort of the growth of political awareness and stuff as part of the learning aside from project learning. But it sounds like Puerto Rico certainly has something unique in that department. That's really interesting. Thank you. And it also provides us a great segue to our next project center director, who is Courtney Kurlanska. Courtney is the director of the Ecuador Project Center.
Hi, I'm here.
Give her a minute to get on the screen. Hi, Courtney. Courtney, how does the Ecuador Project Center prepare students for a lifetime of global engagement?
That's a great question. And I'd actually like to edit it a little bit. I'd like to say it's a lifetime of global ethical engagement. I think one of the things we focus on and emphasize at the Ecuador Project Center is making sure our students understand the ethical implications of what they're doing and how they can do that. And we start by modeling that with the way we come up with our projects. And all of our projects are driven by community organizations. They all come from the bottom up, right? So it links to a lot of what Lauren was saying in her presentation. But I think that is one of our primary focus. And by having the students see and understand how we come up with these projects, and we talk them through where the projects came from and the different organizations we're working with, and helping them understand that these are all projects that the people support and want, and that in order for these projects to be successful and in order for them to have value to the community, that's how it has to start, right? So even when we work with larger governmental organizations, because we work with state-run organizations, we work with NGOs, we work with small foundations. at the core of all of our projects is this level of community engagement, right? Where the students interact with individuals. And one of the most recent projects that we worked on last year was with ATAPA, which is an organization that's in charge of the local water resources. And this team of students went into this project with a very technological mindset. They're like, oh, we're going to be mapping these zones of where the forest fires are and all of this kind of stuff. And they did all this research to do like this technical analysis of the problem. And they get on the ground and they were shocked in some ways to realize that, well, yeah, the mapping's part of it, but they found out that their sponsor really just wanted them to talk to the locals and talk to community members to understand what they could do, because there were plans for forest fire mitigation, which is what the project was about. But I think the sponsor really helped them to understand that it doesn't matter what we as the government agencies tell them to do. If it's not appropriate, if it's not coming from the community level, they're not going to do it. They're not going to engage with it. So that team, which was all women actually, were out with these technical surveyors, and they were out there and they would go into these farming communities and talk to the farmers and try to understand the situation. And they really grew a lot through that experience in understanding the importance of incorporating that local perspective. And towards the end of their project, they got a call from their director, and he's like, we got to go, you got to get in the car, we got to go see this. And he drove them up to a mountain they'd been to maybe 3 weeks prior. And it was in the zone where they were creating this forest fire mitigation plan. And it was all burned. A forest fire had come through the previous night. And the girls, or the women, I was surprised at first. I was like, oh no, they're going to be devastated. They're going to throw their hands up in the air and say, why are we doing this? What's the point? And I think maybe they thought that for 15, 20 minutes. But I was so proud when they came back to me with the realization that, you know what, this just shows that the work we're doing is so important, right? Because it helps us to understand that it's really needed and it's really valued. And they did end up completing the development of the plan, and the pre-COVID times, at least, the goal was that was going to be a model, and they were going to replicate that forest fire mitigation plan in different communities and different watersheds all around the country, right? So I think those kinds of experiences where they get to see firsthand the importance of their work and what they can do and what they can bring is important. But even more than seeing what they can do is what they can learn. So I think one of the most important things that we help them to understand is that the strength of the program and the strength of what they do at the Ecuador Project Center is really in listening and learning from others. And so for me, I think one of the things we do to promote this global engagement and ethical engagement is to flip the narrative for our students coming from the US who think that they come in with all the answers. But really what they have are the questions, and they need to talk with individuals and find the answers locally by understanding the situation and working with the people.
Thank you, Courtney. That was really interesting and impactful. And I think, yeah, when you said flip the narrative, that's exactly the words that occurred to me as you were telling the story. And I also thought of flipping the narrative in terms of where does expertise lie, and who's the expert and who's the teacher. Sometimes it's not us as teachers either. We're just putting students in touch with the real teachers, right?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Courtney. And last but certainly not least, we have Melissa Bells.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Melissa. Melissa is the Project Center Director for Costa Rica. There's 2 sites in Costa Rica, in Monteverde and in San Jose. Melissa, I think we were going to reference the Monteverde Project Center in particular, but it's up to you how you wish to answer my question, which is, how does the Monteverde Project Center help students to link sustainability with social justice?
Okay, so I guess I can blend them a little bit too. It was 4 years ago that I began the Project Center in Monteverde because it seemed like a unique opportunity to have a project center in a small town. And it has a dense pool of scientists working on biodiversity, sustainability, conservation, climate. And there was a high demand for projects in San Jose with its focus on sustainability and environment. And we're usually working in cities because they have enough opportunities for projects year after year. And Monteverde actually has a lot of project opportunities because there's so much good work going on in a small place. So what has naturally evolved that I didn't necessarily expect, but like Courtney mentioned, these projects come from the community. They don't come from us. They're not top down from WPI, but we have so many projects that are focused on community empowerment in Monteverde. And because a sustainable livelihood is the foundation of the town, the projects don't have to be so overtly environmental. That's just sort of a given within the context. So for example, we've worked with, for 3 years, the World Trails Network, which is developing a long distance trail hiking from mountain to coast, and they are promoting reforestation. But an underlying motivation is that, and it's what the students contribute to, is to bring the tourist economy into these small villages and give them the opportunity to have a say in the process. So it's less just about reforestation or, outdoor recreation. And we've worked on the beginning stages of an organic farmers association to expand local sales of their products. We've worked with a really interesting group called Sail Cargo that's building a zero emission sailing cargo vessel that students helped plan their reinvestment scheme to reinvest any profits of the company into local producers who wouldn't necessarily write for a grant, but still they might need a new tractor, for example. A team is currently working on a project for alternative currency, so people can earn credit in Monteverde for volunteering or for pro-environmental behavior. And when you can use that credit for food, that means more equity for the whole community. And at the same time, it's promoting and encouraging sustainable practices and taking care of your neighbors. Students are also working on a project to create a shared transportation system that's reimagining all of the small shuttle buses that are grounded from the pandemic. And it will get cars off the road. It will improve some of the tourist experience, but it also helps workers significantly by converting this tourist convenience into a real community asset moving forward. And so the current pandemic has forced the community to really reassess a lot of its current models. And in the end, yes, it is a dense network of scientists and people who care about the environment. And we love that, the students love that, they want environmental projects. But it's also just an incredibly tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone and they all want to support each other. The town was started by Quakers, and they are pacifists, they're collaborative, and they're the original conservationists for the watershed and the hillsides. So the community still holds those values, and the student projects just reflect that. They reflect what's coming out of the community. So all the projects are intertwined, and one project supporting or influencing another or reaping the benefits of another WPI project that's just going on in the community. I didn't expect that, even knowing it was such a small community. But I think that's what really makes it unique. And I hope the students see that, even though they can't go there this year. You can still feel it in the way the 6 projects that are being prepared for right now are all interconnected, and the sponsors all know each other, and they feel like one project supports another. I also hope that the students start to connect that environmental justice is also very closely tied to social justice.
Thank you, Melissa. That was great, really interesting, and I think it sort of also tunes into a message that we've been listening to for this entire series, right? This entire event, and that is that the fundamental social basis of sustainability. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so that wraps up our roundtable. As sort of a sort of a farewell to you all, we wanted to do one more quick round and give you 2 words that describe the future of our project center, just for a bit of fun. So why don't we do just a lightning round? Let's start back at the beginning with Aaron.
2 words to describe the future.
The future of your project center.
Well, it's 2020, so I'm not going to bet a horse one way or the other, frankly. I would say perhaps better integrated. I mean, that's 2 words, but I mean it as one phrase.
2 words, okay.
Yeah, and sustainable.
Great, thank you, Aaron, thank you. Arthi.
Let's go with enduring and Brazil.
Okay. Interesting. You guys are creating a lot of mystique here. Lauren, what are your 2 words?
I want to say hurricane and pandemic, but I'll be optimistic and say like broader impacts, I would say.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Courtney, what are your 2 words?
Socially engaged.
Wonderful. And Melissa, back to you to round things off.
Pura vida.
Buena vida. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed listening to all of your stories. I learned so much more about all of my treasured colleagues. It was just wonderful. Thank you. And that wraps up our roundtable.